Here today for our Sam on Campus event with the Minister of State for Universities, Science, Research and Innovation, Sam Gyimah. It's fantastic to have you here. Thank you for coming along. And we're streaming live from Harry's Bar and the Students' Union, thanks to our friends at StagTV. So to give you an idea of the layout for the session today, we're going to start off with some introductory remarks from the Minister, followed by some pre-prepared questions from the Union before throwing it out to the crowd for about half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and wrapping up about 12 o'clock. Sam, over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming today. I was at university quite a long time ago, over 20 years ago, and Friday mornings, this would not be my preferred choice of activity, but thank you for coming. When I was appointed to this job, one of the things I decided to do was that when I visited a university, rather than just seeing the Vice-Chancellor and talking to them about their issues, that I also wanted to talk directly to staff and to students, and to make myself accessible to as many staff and students as possible, so that it's not just lobbyists that are determining policy, but also students can help drive the policy that we are reflecting on in the department. So that is why I'm here, and that is why the idea of Sam on Campus comes from. And I've been doing this all around the country since I was appointed. And often when these things start, people ask me a few questions about university and education issues, and then it goes into all sorts of areas. I'll do my very best to answer all your questions. Second point is, it's great to be at Surrey University. I'm a Surrey MP. I represent East Surrey, or as some people who are from Surrey would call it, the Far East. Of Surrey. We're at the border of Surrey and Kent. And so this is my sort of home university as far as universities are concerned. And before coming here today, I went to Surrey Satellites. And it's, an absolutely terrific visit. And in many ways, it's what many people don't see our universities as doing. Okay, people understand the universities provide undergraduate education. Sometimes they mistakenly think undergraduate education is just like a bigger sixth form. It's actually higher learning, it's independent learning. But the whole area around research and innovation is a bit that the public don't see at all. And at Surrey Satellites, I thought that's kind of a dream story of someone who was at this university, did their PhD on a subject area, set up a company's local, employing people, it's world leading, has got external investment from an international company and continues to be local. And that's what I enjoy about my job. The fact that every aspect of it, whether it's the undergraduate part or the research and innovation part, it's all about optimism and the future and what is possible. And to that extent, I think I've got one of the best jobs in government. But anyway, over to you. This is an interesting time in politics, for want of a better word, and I'm sure that all of you, with your futures ahead of you, are wondering kind of what next, and I would say, and also what part you can play in that. So I'm here to answer your questions as best as I can. Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
And we should say as well, if you want to join the conversation, please do go on Twitter and use the hashtag #SamOnCampus. So to kick off then, Minister, you've recently spoken about an app to increase social mobility and improve access to higher education for students from widening participation backgrounds, helping them to compare courses in terms of earning potential. How is this going to open up higher education to people who wouldn't normally consider university?
Right. Yes, I got into trouble for this when I called this app Money Supermarket for Students. And then all my trolls on Twitter started saying, university is not just about money. True. But the real point is, since the 2012 reforms, where there's more choice available, so you've got tuition fees up there, we've removed the cap on student numbers, so there are more people going to university than ever before, and more disadvantaged students going to university than ever before. There's been the question as to how do you actually enable or empower students to make the best choices for themselves. And going around universities, I remember at Birmingham talking to one undergraduate. He said, before I applied, I didn't know, for example, what a Russell Group university was, right? Or I didn't know what a research-intensive university was, or what a vocational university was. And I realized actually, if you go to the right school or you're from the right background, there's a lot of knowledge and information that you just have available to you when you're deciding what to study, where to study, and what you want out of your university education. But we now know more than ever before about courses, about course outcomes, and a whole range of data that is available. So why don't we pull it all together, and rather than the government trying to set up something, make this information available to technology developers and get them to develop apps that prospective students will use. And so the shorthand for this is sort of Go Compare for students. I saw some of the prototypes a couple of weeks ago, and it's incredible what people are using with the data for. So let's say you take psychology, and I'm assuming that psychology is one of the courses that is offered here. Many people in psychology go and do a whole range of different things. And what this creator of the app had done is he linked the data to obviously earnings of people from the university, but then to LinkedIn. So you can go and see who was at your university, who studied your course, and what they're doing 5-10 years out. And it gives you a real sense of what is possible from doing a course. It gives you a sense of, he's added cost of accommodation data. So really, do you want to go to that university given the costs involved, or do you want to choose other costs? So my objective here is to democratize information and to empower students to make the best choices for them. And I believe that students know what is best in terms of what they want to do. Our job is to make sure that there is a level playing field in terms of the information that is available between those who will be from backgrounds where they just know this stuff because family, friends, godfathers, etc. provide their information, and those for whom it's probably the first time and it's their first in their family looking to go to university.
Thank you, and I'm sure this concept of level playing field will come back when we have the chance for a Q&A with the floor. Shifting the conversation slightly to international students. Our international students here, as well as elsewhere in the UK, pay vastly more for HE courses, and of course are subject to additional pressures, whether that's visa restrictions, currency fluctuations, securing accommodation and so on. So what's being done to support international students and ensure their value for money?
That's a very good question. International students are vital to the UK higher education system, and it's not just because, as you said, they obviously pay more for their degrees and of course subsidizes research, for example, but it's, I think, more importantly in terms of the student and the research community, it's part of what enriches the university experience. Now, every lab I've been to since I got this job has been hosted with a community of international students and postgraduates doing fantastic research. I believe that the reason why the UK university system is not only world-class but envied around the world is because we're open to international students. And there are a number of things. You mentioned from a visa point of view. I have said, and I said this a number of times, that we want to and we should be as open as possible and make it as easy as possible for international students. And because we benefit from having the brightest and the best, the talented and the entrepreneurial from around the world coming to study and then work at our universities. And that includes removing the friction from some of the visa processes. I've spoken to the Home Secretary a number of times about this. I think there will be an immigration white paper soon. There will then be a bill. And we're discussing these sort of post-Brexit to make sure that we're still as open as we can. There is no cap on international students that can study in the UK, so that is a positive thing. In terms of financial support, the financing mechanism for international students is very different to domestic students, and any support of them is support that would have to come from the university rather than the UK government per se. But I think we should make sure that they have as an enriching experience and they get value for money as possible, and that we are competitive in terms of price. And the last time I asked this question as UK International, it looks like on our pricing for international students, we are competitive with our main competitors, Australia, Canada, the United States. So to that extent, our pricing is competitive. We need to make sure that obviously as they study, they get what they're paying for.
Okay. And sticking with this theme of money, something that's been in the news for, lingering for a while now, is the topic of Vice-Chancellor pay. Have you got any comment to make on the stories we've seen recently about the level of VC pay, and how much is too much in the current climate. I'm thinking, for instance, of Bath not too long ago, and other.
So not Surrey, good. Yes. Well, the number of points there. My opening point of this is, I'm the university's minister, and I don't have a problem with vice chancellors earning more than I earn, and so long as they're delivering value for the job that they're supposed to do. First point. But second point is, vice chancellors should not be able to set their own pay. So whether that means not sitting on remuneration committees, and I think that is a change that has been introduced. So vice chancellors do not sit on remuneration committees, or have people they've basically appointed on the committees setting their pay, because that's just an indirect way of setting your pay. I think that is unacceptable. And but the third point I'll make is that yes, universities are autonomous institutions, and they decide what staff and vice chancellors get paid. I think there is something concerning if you have a divergence between vice chancellor pay and pensions, and the nature of the contracts that staff and particularly junior academics are on. I think that is unstable for the university community. So I would expect the governing bodies to look at this and be very mindful. Now, what can government do? I think one of the changes that is coming into force is more transparency around pay, not just the absolute pay, but also more transparency around the pay relative to what other staff earn in the university community. And my expectation is that that transparency would allow pressure to be brought to bear where vice chancellor pay is escalating in an unacceptable way, especially versus staff and lecturers who are also working very hard in the university community. You mentioned specifically the example of Bath. I mean, that vice chancellor is no more, but I would say that it was an egregious level of pay, and one that I do not expect to see repeated around the university system.
Thank you. A couple more pre-prepared questions, if we could. Firstly, in England, we know that BME students and other underrepresented groups consistently receive lower proportions of first-class degrees than their white counterparts. What's being actively done on a national scale in order to not only close this gap, but also hold universities that are lagging behind accountable?
Yes, I mean, this is a very important question. So, in terms of access to university, the number of BME students, or percentage of BME students going to university, has increased dramatically since the 2012 reforms, and that is something that we should be proud of. But then there is another question, which is attainment at university. And there, as your question quite rightly points out, there is a gap in attainment levels between BME students doing the same subjects as other students. And we need to understand why. We need to understand what is going on. In general, what I think is that doesn't mean that we should be lowering the standard to meet the students. We should actually be raising students' abilities to actually meet the standards. Now, how we go about it, what government can do, is the Prime Minister obviously announced a race disparity audit. And one of the areas that the audit is looking at is specifically the difference in outcomes in higher education institutions. And I think that there are some recommendations that will be published quite soon in terms of how universities should focus laser-like on this particular issue. But you've also got the new regulator, the Office for Students. And the Office for Students came into force this August. Before that, you had the, I think it was OFFA, the Office for Fair Access. The Office for Fair Access focused very much on access to university. But what the new regulators is focusing on is access and participation at university. So in addition to what the government will be publishing in the race disparity audit, you've got a regulator that is scrutinizing participation, attainment levels at university, and is in constant dialogue with the university leadership on how to improve attainment in this level. Now, I absolutely agree with you that we want a university system where everyone, irrespective of your background, not only gets to attend, but gets to actually fulfill their potential and get on in life. And there's a long way to go in terms of that.
Okay, thank you. And then finally from me, the current review of post-18 education funding hit the news recently with the possibility of lowering tuition fees to some 6.5k per year, but potentially increasing them for STEM subjects with a subsidy from the government. Do you have any updates on the progress of the review? And how might this affect, for instance, arts and humanities subjects, which wouldn't be eligible for a top-up?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is the story you've outlined is pure speculation, and it wouldn't surprise you if I said I'm not going to comment on speculation. But I think the review is meant to publish. It's an independent panel. They're publishing their findings early in the new year. What I'll do is I'll give you my sense of kind of what I would like to work with the panel on for the panel to achieve. And the first thing is we've got to make sure that our universities are well funded. We don't help undergraduates by having universities that are not well funded. The second thing is we've got to make sure that, here in Guildford, I suppose, is one of the issues, things like cost of living, somewhere like here is an issue. I'd be surprised if it came up. That students, that wherever we can help, that we are helping with that. Value for money is an important criteria in terms of people getting what they pay for. But the other aspect is, which we've touched on already now, is social mobility. That I would want to see a university system that actually genuinely allows people from all backgrounds to access university education and do well. And so we don't want to go back to the time when university was the preserve of the well-heeled and who could sort of elbow their way into university. So those are the things that I'll be looking at and be looking to work with a panel on. But the review is not just about university, it's also about further education and access to further education. I think what is important is that we move away from a narrative where the default is seen as university. So we want an excellent and world-class university system, but we also want a world-class further education system. Further education does something different, but it should be funded well to do what it does.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the audience eagerly awaiting the outcome of the review. So at this point, we've got 40 minutes or so to open out to the crowd, just so that I can gauge the room. Could I see roughly how many people have got questions at this stage? In which case, we'll take them two at a time, if that's okay with you, Minister. Holly, I saw your hand up, and then there was someone behind you, I think. Oh, AK, hello. Can we get the mic over to these two first?
Hi there. Can everybody hear me? Oh, gosh, that's scary. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I have a question about, you touched on the cost of living in Guildford and Surrey in general. And I think a problem we're finding is that a lot of students can't really afford just generally the cost of living in Guildford as well as the housing prices. So I have a question here. I'm really nervous. We are based in Guildford, just outside of London, and one of the most expensive areas to live in the UK. We do not receive any London weighting in addition to a normal student loan or research council stipend. This is despite average rents in our area being greater than Egham, where Royal Holloway is based and where London weighting is added. Do you think a southeast weighting scheme could be brought in to support students studying in very expensive areas such as Guildford?
We have the question on south.
Question, clearly.
And can we just get AK as well?
Hi, I'm AK. I'm an SU officer from the Voice Zone. I just wanted to ask, you talked a lot about student experience, but what is student experience under the current climate? You have EU students who are facing uncertainty and hostility in the wake of Brexit. You have international students who are paying obscene amounts and are subjected to racist government schemes like Prevent. You have postgraduate students who are overworked and underpaid, lecturers who are having to undertake strike action to protect their pensions, and the poorest students who have to rely on a maintenance loan scheme and graduate with the highest amount of debt. And obviously the rent problem, which Holly articulated. So what is student experience and what is our future with this obscene amount of debt? Surely the solution is corporate tax, taxing the ones in the top 1%. I just want your thoughts on that. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, AK. So shall we start with the question on the southeast weighting?
Yes. Is it Holly? Thanks for that question. And I can understand certainly the concern about the discrepancy between sort of if you go to Guildford versus going to Royal Holloway in Eggenham, you get £3,000 more, and that's kind of material amount of money. But even beyond that, at every one of these events I've done, the main concern of students has been accommodation and the pound in the pocket. That's what students are keep telling me. I think, and so one of the things that the post-18 review panel would be looking at is the whole issue of maintenance and what to do around that. So there is a process in hand to do that. Now, specifically, the point you made around London waiting or Southeast waiting is the one that I haven't come across yet. And I'll definitely feed into what the panel is considering. But being a Surrey MP, I know that living in Surrey is expensive, and I can totally understand the concerns, and also accommodation and access to decent accommodation here. It's a small town, all of that. So thanks for raising it, but I am very alive to the issue and understand kind of where you're coming from. That said, the system we have now, and that will take me onto AK's question, is one where maintenance is not a bar, or being able to live is not a bar to someone going to university. That's the other side, right? So you can access a maintenance loan of £10,000. Now, it might not be enough for all your costs, and I know that there are some areas where the accommodation alone eats up most of that, and you're asked to pay that in advance. But the previous system on its own, where you got a grant of say 3,000 or 4,000, that didn't go very far either. So today, you have a better system than the previous system, but I hear you in terms of the challenges that students are facing. AK's question is one of those that are, it's like sort of list all the grievances and paint it as this is characteristic of the system overall. And I would say, look, we have a world-class university system in this country, and everywhere in the world I've been to, our universities are the envy of the world. And I think that is important to recognize. Now, the issues you talk about in terms of student debt, let me take that one. I'll go on to some of the other issues that you've brought up. If you make university free, there is only one way to deliver that. That would mean you have to cap student numbers. If you cap student numbers, i.e. limit the number of people who can go to university, the people who will disproportionately benefit are the sharp-elbowed well-off who will get to university. University is expensive, particularly mass higher education. 30 years ago, when we had elite higher education and something like 15% of the population went to university, it wasn't as expensive. We now have 1 in 2 of 18 to 25-year-olds, 18 to 30-year-olds going to university. That is an expensive business. And so the system we've developed is one where where the cost is shared between the taxpayer and the individual that benefits. The taxpayer subsidy into university is 45%, right? So although students do take out loans, the taxpayer still bears a subsidy. We've got a system where if you're out of work, you don't pay anything. You have to earn over £25,000 to pay something, and after 30 years is written off. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I'm saying that in terms of the challenge of having a mass higher education, and if you speak to the OECD that looks at university systems across the world, they will say that the UK has found a sustainable way of funding its higher education system. Within that system, should we look at better support, like Holly said, for students who are in expensive places or who are particularly cash-strapped? Yes, we should. And by the way, the money that goes on access, £860 million a year is supposed to go on access. Roughly 343 of that goes on bursaries for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. This is a way of saying that we've created a system that means we've got more people and more disadvantaged students going to university than ever before in a sustainable way. It may not be perfect, but that works. Now, the other issues you talk about in terms of international students, I don't know what the experience of international students is at Surrey in particular, but what I do know is that in every country that I've been to, the brightest and the best there see studying in the UK as a huge aspirational objective because of the quality of our universities, because of the range of courses that we offer. And this is not just people from developing countries. If you go to other EU countries, countries like Spain, people are putting their children in international schools to prepare them to be able to come to university here in droves. So I don't recognize the situation that you paint in terms of what is happening in our universities. But I do take your point that post-Brexit, we need to double down on our efforts to make sure that people, the world outside appreciates that we are open, that we want to collaborate in the areas of research, that we are not turning ourselves away from the rest of the world, and that our universities are going to be the spearhead of what global Britain can achieve.
If I could just push you slightly on this.
Go ahead.
We've had research that suggests that students from poorer backgrounds tend to leave with higher amounts of debt. But also on this point that you make about access, Surrey and various other universities will use postcodes as one measure of socioeconomic classification. Is that not just a postcode lottery when it comes to providing bursaries to students from poorer backgrounds?
Well, I mean, firstly, your point about more debt. The thing is, after 30 years is written off, right? And we've got a hybrid system between a loan system and a contribution system. At its heart, what our system is that you graduate and you pay 9% of your salary above £25,000 for 30 years. That is what it is. And at the end of it, wherever you get to, you don't have anyone knocking on your door to ask for the balance. And if you happen to do a socially worthwhile job that pays less than that, you don't have to pay anything back. If you're an artist or a musician and you earn less than that, you don't pay anything back. So yes, in terms of the total amount of debt, if you call it that way, it's more. But everyone, whether you are rich or poor, if you earn over £25,000, you pay 9% for a fixed period of time, and then it's written off. In terms of how bursaries are allocated and being done on postcode, I think postcode is one way of looking at it, and it is certainly, having been the education funding minister before, it does drill down into sort of specifically people who could be poor, but there might be someone who just lives on this half, in some parts of the country, certainly London, one part of a street that is actually quite well off, and I guess where your question is driving at is people who might not necessarily live in the most deprived postcodes, but might also be struggling. And how does the system take care of that? And I think that's something for you to raise with the Vice Chancellor and President in terms of how Surrey does it. But yes, I do recognise that the fact that someone doesn't live in a deprived postcode doesn't mean that they can't be cash-strapped and struggling through university.
Okay, thank you. I think there was a question at the front, if I saw correctly. We've got one here and one at the back.
Thank you. My name's Peter. I actually work at Surrey. I work in international recruitment. And I suppose the thing I wanted to pick up on was you talked about how the UK is very competitive with the rest of the world, and how the brightest and the best really want to come to the UK. I agree with you to a point. I think that what's really killing us is the fact that we don't have a meaningful post-study work option for students. Every student that we're meeting that would love to come here, it's a real barrier for them, and I feel that we are really losing out because of that. I just wondered what your comments were there. And just very quickly on the debt thing, I think it's the feeling and the perception that people have of debt, and we're making that very normal for people, and maybe a graduate tax would sound better to people. I know that's not a very conservative friendly thing, but that's my thought.
Yeah, and I think we had a question from Solomon as well, if we could get that.
Hi, so in the current employment market, the dramatic increase in student numbers over the past 20 years has caused market saturation and innovation of employment qualification criteria, meaning that higher qualifications are needed for the same work in the past. What solution does your office propose to address this issue?
Thank you.
Okay. So Peter, you had two questions here. so international students, firstly, I'll be absolutely honest about it. Our post-study work visa regime is not as competitive with countries like Canada and Australia, who have really recognised how big this market is and have got a more generous visa regime, for example. And if you look at the growth rates, it's reflected in that. I think in the last year we grew by 0.2%, they're growing by 2+%. So there's something that needs to be done there, and it's something that I've raised with the Home Secretary a number of times if we're going to be competitive in that world. And especially now that we've got the MAC report out there, it's an independent report into looking at our immigration system, and we know that the vast majority of students go back. So it's something for the Home Secretary to look at. We might not call it a post-study work visa or whatever, but the amount of time we give people to find work for a limited period of time before they go back to their country is something that we've got to look at. And there were some positive recommendations in the MAC. As a universities minister, I would want us to go further, but that's a subject for discussion, and it'll be a cross-government decision. The second part of your question, which is the graduate tax. I mean, the system we've got is a graduate contribution system, in essence, because it's as I said, it's 9% of your income for 30 years, and if you're out of work, you don't pay anything. The good thing about the system now is that the money follows the student directly, which is a good thing. There's always something, this is more sort of an academic point I would make, that if you have a graduate tax, the next election there'll be a campaign to reduce the tax. You know, because suddenly you'll be like, why do graduates pay this tax? You've got to reduce this tax. And so does that in some way lead to unsustainable financing in the long term? But that doesn't mean ruling it out completely. I think that's an academic point. And another point that was made at the time that this system was debated was how you deal with, say, students who then move abroad, who don't pay their taxes here. And that's sort of a real problem because, you know, how do you collect the money from them? Whereas the student loan system allows you to. But our system is a graduate contribution system. It's as close to a graduate tax as you can get. But when you've got an interest rate and you've got a statement that has an opening balance and a closing balance, it looks like a loan, it sounds like a loan, and it's talked about as debt, you're right, people feel anxious about it. But the other things we're doing, for example, 2-year degrees, it might not be, I don't think it's right for every subject. I don't think it's right for everyone. I don't think it would have been right for me in terms of I think it works best when you know what you want to do immediately afterwards and you can study it quite quickly. But that's another path that I don't know if this university offers it, that can reduce kind of the burden or the financial burden that you have when you leave university, if for certain subjects you can do them more quickly. The question at the back, which kind of relates to this, I disagree with the premise of it. The premise of the question is you've got more students now, and because you've got more students now, somehow you need to have more qualifications from university in order to get a similar job. I actually start from the position that we need more technical qualifications, we need more graduates, and we need more postgraduates. It doesn't follow that because you've got more graduates that the graduate premium necessarily reduces, because there isn't a finite number of jobs. If the economy is growing, you have more demand for graduates. And so I think that it's good that we're being competitive in the number of graduates we are producing. Is 1 in 2 18 to 30 year olds, as I said. If you go to Ireland, which is very close to us and getting records amount of foreign direct investment, it's 66%, right? But you can still do really well in Ireland. And also what changes over time is what's a graduate job and what is not a graduate job. So there was a time when you didn't need to do a degree to be a lawyer. Now you're not going to be a lawyer if you haven't done a degree. So it keeps shifting in terms of what you need, the qualifications you need to do. But I don't think that necessarily devalues what you get out of it. And next week, let you into a secret, we'll be publishing some research, or we're planning on publishing some research, depending on our timetables, etc., that would show that the graduate premium for men and women still holds up, even in this era of mass expansion. I think, though, what we do know is that what you study and where you study it makes a huge difference to the outcomes you get in terms of the employment market. So it's not where the number of graduates per se, it's what you study and where you study it is a huge determinant of the salary uplift that you get. And so that is why, going back to your original question, Alex, having more information for students about the returns, although returns are not everything, is hugely important when they're making a decision about what to study and where to study.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Questions? Oh, these two here, if we could. We have
the two over there.
Nick and just your right.
Hi, how you doing? I'm actually really tired. Okay, so I'm a PhD student, so I've been here for forever in the education system, and So this year, we had reports of there's one student who was having to live in a van at the beginning of the year because they couldn't afford to actually get accommodation or food. I know this relates to earlier questions, but I want to link this into the idea of sustainability. So the OECD, so they said that this was like a sustainable model, but didn't the House of Lords this summer say that the students' loan book would increase to 1 trillion in 25 years? So when we say sustainable, are we not just building a huge speculative bubble that will at some stage pop? And we're going to have a form of crash because, as you said, there are going to be students that aren't going to earn the wages worth taxing, so that loan is literally going to disappear. I just don't see how this is a good way of funding education because I don't see how we're paying for it. I'm not a politician.
Very, very, very clever man. You're doing a PhD. I'm sure you've got some.
I'm doing a PhD in quantum physics. I don't have the time to work out the country's problems. I've literally every day is an anxiety-inducing experience where I'm worried that my research is actually all wrong. So
Big brain. You'd have some suggestions.
yeah, maybe I'll be in Parliament someday and we'll sort this entire thing out.
Right.
You heard it here first. And just next to you.
I'm Kwaku from Ghana, University of Ghana. I'm doing a PhD over here. I came to do a Viva just a month ago. Now, this is a personal experience. When I got to the airport, I was put on a holding bay for 6 hours just because the letter that Surrey gave to me, I didn't have it with me. And I requested that, could I get access to the net so that I could just check onto my university website and generate the letter? They said, no, our system doesn't give it to you. So I had to be there whilst they communicate with Surrey, my professor, to be able to get a letter from Surrey again. And all along, this holding, anybody that comes in, my fear was that a Ghanaian journalist will take a picture of me and go and flash it in Ghana that I've been caught on a drug or anything of that sort. Can you do some things, like putting the person somewhere private, so that the person could at least have some privacy? And there was no toilet facility. I have to log out to be able to go to the toilet. And after 6 hours, before they just released me, and all along, my professor was asking me, are you okay? Have you been able to arrive? Have they released you? It was, I think, the day after that I was able to get access to my emails and be able to reply him that I've been able to get over here. So please.
So the first question, which is about the design of the system. Let me make a point of principle first, and then I'll come to your question. I alluded to I think in answer to an earlier question around how mass higher education is expensive. And let me develop that thought. There are two big things in policy terms that we've never had to deal with before. One is mass higher education, the other is aging. The 19th century, people lived to a life expectancy was about 60. Now here in Surrey, if you go to East Surrey Hospital, which is my local hospital, the average age of the patient they deal with is 84. Now, aging is a problem that we've not had to deal with before and all the complexities of it. And what is the link between dealing with aging and dealing with mass higher education? These are things that we're suddenly realizing are incredibly difficult and expensive to finance, right? The cost of social care is a huge problem. So we need new ways, or in public policy terms, of thinking about how we finance the system. And there are no easy answers, right? If you try and reduce the number of people massively going to university, say, you're not necessarily helping your economy because we're a knowledge-based economy. We need the technical people. We need the graduates with general skills. We need the postgraduates doing quantum physics. We need all of them for our type of economy. So there isn't an easy answer to massively reduce the cost of higher post-18 education system. And it's also false to think that somehow if they weren't going to university, it would be so much cheaper for the taxpayer. Nor is it an option to do what Jeremy Corbyn says, frankly, which is I'll do it for free. Right? It's not possible. It's never going to be possible. So we've got to find a way through it. The current system has been designed specifically in the knowledge that not everyone will pay the loan back. Now you can go two ways. You can either accept that taxpayer subsidy, or you can say that you don't want a speculative bubble, in which case what you do is you reduce the threshold. You reduce the threshold of repayment from £25,000 to £18,000, and the taxman will collect a lot more back. Now, the debate is essentially one of how do you structure the taxpayer subsidy into higher education? Do you do it on the other end, as in people who don't pay their loan and then pick up the subsidy, inject the subsidy then? Or do you do it up front, which is to say, okay, the taxpayer is going to subsidize it to this tune and then you pay the rest? That's essentially what the debate is. There is going to be a reclassification of the student loan book by the ONS very soon. So I think we're going to be having this debate in Parliament, which you've alighted on. But my answer is there is no easy way to fund a mass system of higher education, which is essential to our economy. Either way, the numbers are big, students are going to have to contribute, and the taxpayer is also going to have to contribute. There is a question as to what you can get employers to do as well, which is something that I know some smart people are looking at. But there isn't any easy way out of this, any more than there is an easy way of dealing with the huge costs of social care, dementia, and people living very long. These are the big policy challenges of our age. In terms of the other gentleman, Kweku from Ghana, saying, yeah. So I grew up in Ghana. That's why I know how to say hello in Chi. And I'm sorry about your experience. And I think that we should make sure that people are treated as humanely and fairly as possible. But in your specific case, if I'm to be blunt about it, if you're going to appear at immigration, you kind of need that letter. And I think it's unfortunate that you weren't allowed to go and access the internet to be able to generate that letter. And so I'm sorry for kind of your experience.
Okay, let's move on. There was a question over here, and can we have this one as well? How many roaming mics do we have? Oh yeah, Olivia, you first.
Hi Sam, I'm Olivia, and I'm over here. I'm union chair here at the Students' Union. So you mentioned earlier that Vice Chancellors' sort of pay should be related to the added value that they bring to the university experience. So regarding Vice Chancellor and sort of senior management remuneration packages, does it not make sense to enact a change that would allow for students to vote on whether they agree or disagree with any potential increases in pay dependent on how satisfied they are with senior management, especially as this is what organisations already do, sort of external to this higher education industry?
Thank you. And we also had a question at the front here. Ollie, please.
Hi Sam, I'm Ellie. I'm final year German and Spanish student, and I only have 6 contact hours per week. So I was wondering if you think tuition fees should be reflective of the hours that you actually have at uni.
Okay. Thank you. This is Olivia and Ellie. Olivia, I mean, I think what happens in the corporate world is that shareholders can vote on the chief executive or senior management's salary that's recommended by a remuneration committee. That's quite different to subjecting your salary to a mass kind of referendum. And I think that transparency, as I said, should help. But I also think governing bodies should be sensible. You can't, if it's students' fees, we want most of the money to go on more contact hours, better facilities, not on generous pay and perks. And what I would say is that if the changes that have been introduced now around transparency do not lead to a change in behavior on the part of governing bodies and vice chancellors, then they will be to blame themselves for what comes next. So there's been a big issue with it. We've introduced some changes. Let's see how those changes pan out. And I would want to see vice chancellors, governing bodies, exercise restraint themselves in an autonomous university system, rather than subjecting it to popular vote, which would have lots of problems, or doing what Labour say, which is the government trying to determine how much people earn. I don't agree with that either. The second point around contact hours, I think, is a very important one. And one of the surprises for me is looking at the university system now, and I want to see more competition around quality. So quality in terms of tuition, quality in terms of contact hours, that's where I want to see the competition coming in. And I think we are a long way from seeing that. The regulator, obviously, the OFS, has a remit to look at value for money, but value for money specifically in terms of whether students are getting what they pay for. The Teaching Excellence Framework, which we've introduced, also which ranks universities on a gold, silver, bronze basis, based on teaching quality, but also dropout rates and what happens afterwards, I think would move us further in the right direction. But I also think the data you mentioned around learning outcomes for different subjects would allow students to be more critical of what they're getting. But I want to see more competition around quality. The issue is not price, it's about quality, because we know that a good degree will be worth the investment. And certainly from what I hear from students, you've mentioned six hours contact time a week. There are other students who've said to me, they turn up at lectures, they're completely rammed in, they hardly have anywhere to sit or somewhere to take their notes. And so that is not acceptable either. So what I want to see is raising the quality bar in terms of what is offered. And in addition to what's done, there will be more that we'll be doing over the coming months.
Thank you,
Does that answer your question? You see, you look skeptical.
I wouldn't say it's a problem with the teaching. I have great teachers. It's just the fact that
you
have
more hours.
6 hours a week. That's equivalent to 1 day a month. And per module, it equals 15 credits, and we're expected to do 150 extra hours of work. So maybe we should be getting paid.
well, Max. You've got Max Liu at the back, so he's clearly listening to you, your vice chancellor. But there's also that university is supposed to be independent learning, isn't it? So
of course.
it's a mixture of.
Compared to different subjects that have 20 to 30 hours, I think humanities and arts are, there's somehow a disparity in some cases where I don't believe that 6 hours is enough. I understand that independent learning is very important, but languages, you need contact hours for that as well.
Yeah. Well, Max, I hope have you got a point to make?
First of all, thank you very much for this very open dialogue. You're very open, transparent, and genuine in terms of answering the questions. So specific to this question, of course, it's nuanced to disciplines. If you argue the 6 hours contact in language is not enough, you're most welcome to fit that into the discipline, the departments, and then there's always opportunity to review curriculum. Contact hours is just one thing. I think quality, I agree with the minister, quality of teaching, quality feedback, assessment, and also other activities that would add value to your skills, not necessarily through contact hours. For example, a practice placement in PTY or short visits and things like that. Or you're exposed to practitioners and speakers on campus. That kind of thing all add value, but you're most welcome to feedback any student who have issues with the curriculum design. I think we have the Vice Provost Education here. There is a curriculum review going on, and that is the opportunity.
And the reason why I think it's really just confounds a lot of people's views of students as not really interested. It's about partying, etc. You're actually asking for more work. Good.
Not too much.
So we've got just under 10 minutes left. I saw a question here first and also over there. I think that's Lucy with her hand, but we'll see how many more we can come to after that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Sam.
Hi.
I'm Sharith from the International Student Recruitment Office. So we travel a lot overseas for attract. No, it's kind of related to what my colleague just said here. So so increasingly we are seeing at overseas exhibitions there's a lot of especially Dutch, German universities also coming on board because they have post-study options, but also importantly they are starting to teach courses in English, which are attractive models. But also at the University of Surrey, I mean, of course, quality, we are very good, and we also celebrate our diversity on campus. So particularly when it comes to, you mentioned about Spanish students, Italian, Greeks, they form a considerable part of the student community here. And with the sort of uncertainty with Brexit and with, at the moment, EU students pay sort of home fees. And we don't know, there's a lot of uncertainty whether they'll be actually paying international fees or not. So, when there are universities in Germany and Netherlands, which are also equally good, how can we still make sure that in the case that they are paying overseas fees after post-Brexit, how can we still make sure that we attract these students to Surrey and to UK universities in general?
Thank you. And we had one from Lucy.
Hello, I'm Lucy, a second-year theatre and performance student. So how do you feel about, in the current climate, universities being forced to increase numbers to survive, and as a result, students at Surrey having lectures in the Odeon?
Right, okay, so international students and the international competition, and you're right that the competition is getting very fierce. I was in Berlin 3 weeks ago, and a lot of their courses, specifically sort of masters and above, that are now taught in English, in Germany, and are free, right? But the Germans have a very different way of sort of looking at the cost for it. But also the Germans have moved from a system where they try to have a comprehensive system of higher education where not many people went, and they didn't invest very much in it, to now trying to emulate where we are. And they've got this 5-year plan in a very German way, which is focused on excellence, and really they're investing something like €500 million into their university system. So the competition is getting very fierce, and with no plan, it is in a very British way, we've arrived at a position where we've got lots of universities in the top 100 in the world, and we never had a strategic plan or anything about that. But I agree with you that we can't rest on our laurels, and specifically on your point around what happens to EU students post-Brexit who now get UK home fee status is an interesting one. Now, I think for 1920, they will still get home fee status, UK fee status. The question is what happens after that. And I would say our approach here has to be one that is reciprocated. So whatever we want to do for EU students, I would want the same to be extended to UK students to study at EU universities. I don't think it will be in our interest as a country to have a situation where if you wanted to go to Delft University in Holland or the Technical University in Berlin, you don't get as good a deal as people coming over here. So in other words, a long way of saying that is something that is subject to negotiation. The theatre and performance student, whose name escapes me, Lucy, and lectures are the Odeon. Student numbers are uncapped, but it doesn't mean that universities have to overdo it, right? The universities have to have a plan in terms of the number of students, and they should think about the facilities they have and how well they can service those students and make sure that the student experience is a high quality one. And I'm sure the Vice Chancellor had that, I would say we want universities to cut their cloth according to their size, not just expand, because the numbers they could take on more people. And whether it's lectures, whether it's seminars, whether it's contact hours, I want to see universities put in a premium on the quality of the experience, not just the numbers of people that they can recruit onto the courses.
Well, just to bring this in dialogue with the university's corporate strategy, there's a page or two devoted in there to the growth imperative. So I suppose if we could move this question slightly, what's being done to increase support for universities to avoid this sort of runaway recruitment situation?
Well, universities are responsible for their business models, right? They have their 5-year strategies. They decide how many people they want to recruit. They recruit the staff and the lecturers to support that. And what you're saying is that I want to see a shift away from growth for growth's sake towards quality in the system. And that means that our vice chancellors and their governing bodies have got to be more focused on that. And when you have students complaining about kind of where lectures are taking place or contact hours, I think it is a kind of a warning signal that this should be looked at more seriously. In terms of, I don't think universities need support from the government. I think what universities need is the government working with the regulator to make sure that, in this sort of new world, that we have business models that are sustainable for the university in terms of finances, but also work and deliver value for students.
Okay, thank you. I make it just shy of 12 o'clock.
Can I take the last three questions?
Hands in the air, guys, sorry. One there. Oh, we've got 4, is that all right?
That's fine,
yeah.
yes.
Right,
no
1,
more.
2, 3, 4.
Hey, so my name's Joseph, I'm a biochem student. One of the big threats to our world-class universities and our science and research industries in the short term is Brexit. And I just wanted to know what, not really your personal opinions on Brexit, but what you've actively done to prepare universities and the science and research industries to protect them from Brexit and to safeguard them.
Hi there, I'm Barney, an economics and finance student 2nd year. So I was part of the group of students that had to have our lecture at Odeon and subsequently at the local Guildford College last year because there isn't just sufficient space on campus. Being economics student, we study the allocation of resources, and that reflects really badly on the university in terms of teaching us resource allocation when you can't even allocate your resources. The irony there, student experience here hasn't been really good in terms of lecturers last year failed to deliver quality lectures for one of our modules. And this year, one of our tests was cancelled 10 minutes before the test, which was supposed to schedule because of unsuitable venue conditions. Student experience hasn't been great, but I would say I would like to give credit when due, whereby last year I see a positive sign of providing e-books as a test bed for students rather than having to purchase expensive books. I saw that as a positive sign moving forward, but the fact that they didn't implement this year came as a surprise to me. So my experience hasn't been that great, but I would like to see more value being created by the university. How do you think the government could support university in implementing strategies which would help value add and prepare students for the current workforce rather than following concepts of the past success, because past success doesn't equate to future success?
Well, I think I'm just taking note on here.
Oh, thank you. I very much liked when in your speech you mentioned that diversity is one of the kind of features of this of our education here as well. About a third, I think, of the students here come from outside of the UK. But unfortunately, as the gentleman from Ghana has mentioned, a lot of the current or upcoming in policy is going against this. I see on on the website theyworkforyou.com that you've consistently voted for stronger enforcement of immigration rules, which may then have caused the situation that the gentleman described, as well as you've almost always voted against a right to remain for EU nationals already living in the UK. That's 13 votes against and 3 absences. So I'm surprised that then you mentioned that you're for international students being here if you've consistently voted against this. Would you like to comment on that?
And then finally, there was one over here.
Hi, yeah, this sort of develops on the first question at the front there, but more specifically, post-Brexit, I'd like to get the Minister's views on how we're going to more positively engage with Erasmus and FP9, the new funding program in Europe going forward? Because for a university like Surrey, a lot of our research income comes directly from the EU, and Erasmus adds to the student exchange that's been raised a few times. So are we going to remain fully engaged with Europe post-Brexit?
Thank you. So I'll take the first and the fourth questions together. The plan is deal or no deal. We do not want a cliff edge for research in terms of research funding. So in the event that there is no deal, the government has committed to underwriting all Horizon 2020 grants that have been that are in place. We will then also have to have a plan for other programs like the mono-beneficiary schemes, the ERC and the MSCA. That's in the event of no deal. In the event that the withdrawal agreement, which is currently on the table, gets voted on and we have a deal, we are then in the implementation period. During the implementation period, we will be negotiating full associate membership with Horizon Europe, which was formerly known as FP9. We understand that we will have less influence than we did before. We understand that we will not get as much back as we put in. I think we used to get something like 1.45 for every pound that we put in. But it is important that UK researchers are able to collaborate with researchers in EU member states. So we're seeking full associate membership. But alongside that, we'll have to look at researcher mobility because there's no point in paying lots of money and not being able to actually associate. We would want some influence. We would want some influence because if we gain full association, we will be investing more than all the other EU member states combined, bar France and Germany. All the other EU member states, bar France and Germany. So in return for that level of investment, even as a sort of an associate member, we would want some influence, at the very least, in terms of where our money goes. We're a long way from getting to that point in these negotiations. We've only had early discussions because the programs are still being designed. But next Friday, I'm in Brussels at the EU Com Council, and we're going to be discussing the basic design of the framework program. Why am I telling you all of this? To give you kind of real assurance that there is work being done to make sure that if there is no deal, that we continue to fund science and research, and if there is a deal, that we get the best deal possible with the EU. Then the other question was about sort of the student experience and
supporting value for money.
Supporting value for money. And I think this is the third or fourth time this has come up today. And clearly, I think we need to do more, and I'm glad that the Vice-Chancellor is here to hear you. I mean, if I was saying anything in defence, I think Guildford is quite a small place, so the university is expanded, but I think, so the real estate is probably quite limited, which is why you are using other resources, other institutions' resources in terms of facilities. But your basic point, which is around the quality of what you're getting, not just teaching, but everything around it, is one that I've taken on board. I'm sure there are others here. I think the Vice Provost Education is here as well, so they will take on board. And then the other question was on my voting record, which I'm very proud of. There are lots of different votes that go on in the House of Commons, right? And I would say that, do I support international students? Yes. Do I support EU students getting good treatment? Yes. These are all these are all government policy, but sometimes you have motions that are brought by the opposition which the government can't support. And if the government can't support it, I will vote against it. I'm a government minister. But everything the government has done so far in the EU negotiations has been to signal that we, for example, EU citizens' rights are protected. That is in the withdrawal agreement, and that will be law, that EU citizens' rights in this country are protected, as well as the rights of UK citizens living within the EU. So there is nothing in government policy that suggests to me that somehow we're not pro-international students. We don't have a cap on student numbers, international student numbers. But there are areas where we can improve. And when I was talking to the gentleman Kweku about was, yes, it's not, ministers don't vote on whether or not someone's allowed to look at an email when they are held in a room at an airport here. That's not what ministers do. But so I was agreeing with him that clearly fairness and being treated humanely is important. And it's good for me to know so that when I speak to the Home Secretary, I can raise that with him so that at an operational level, that these things do happen. But the suggestion that somehow I'm voting on one thing and saying another thing is definitely not the case. I genuinely believe that our university system will not thrive and will not be as successful as it is if we are not open to talent wherever it comes from.
Well, Minister, on that note, thank you so much for such a wide-ranging conversation. We spoke about social mobility and inclusion, international students, and of course, value for money. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks also to all of you in the audience for joining us and being a part of the conversation. As I said at the start, it's really fantastic to see so many people here. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you all very much.
Oh.
Hi, sorry. We obviously have one Minister of State. We're very pleased to say that we have two Ministers of State with us today. If you live in Guildford, your MP is the Right Honourable Anne Milton MP, and she's joined us today. So I shall just introduce her while she's here. Anne?
Just one minute, literally, to thank Sam very much for coming here. You know, I'm very proud of what Surrey does, and it's really useful that the Vice-Chancellor is here to listen to some of the things that students write to me about firsthand. But I think it's also quite good. Both Sam and I work in the Department for Education. I have the other 50% of people, so I deal with people post-16 who aren't in school and all adult education. So I'm trying to find solutions for them. I deal with skills and apprenticeships, but I'm also conscious of the fact that 30 to 40% of adults in this country don't even have a level 3 qualification. So we've got a lot of work to do, if you like, at the other end of the scale to skill up people in this country. It's important, Sam and I work very closely together, it's very important that we get the mix of education right and actually the opportunities for education right to make sure that everybody, wherever they're born, wherever they've come from, have the same opportunities to get on in their life. Thank you very much.
I didn't know you were here. Thank you.